أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, everybody, my dear brothers and sisters, and welcome to another session of Mizan Live on the subject of and topic of Shia Imamiyyah doctrine, Doctrines of Shia Islam, based on the book of Ayatullah Jafar Subhani. Assalamu alaikum, brothers who are saying salam, and welcome, good to see you all tuning in. Okay, so as we wait for people to join, I'm going to go over the main points that we had in our last session. Last session we went through articles 34, 35, and 36, yes. What we covered in these three, we started a new chapter, of course, and we covered the sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sifat and qualities of God, which have been categorized into different categories. When you look at the qualities of God from different angles, you can divide God's characteristics and qualities into different groups. So we had, so far what we've covered in Article 34, he talks about how the qualities of God are divided into Sifatil Jamal wal Jalal. And I explained what that means, what that signifies. Jamal means beauty, Jalal means majesty. But what is meant by them, what is meant by those terms is something specific. These are specific terms in Islamic theology. They also have another name, these characteristics and qualities. Some are referred to as sifat al-thubutiyah and some as sifat al-salbiyah. So sifat al-thubutiyah are the same as sifat al-jamal, and sifat salbiyah are the same as sifat jalal, sifat al-jalal. So I explained these. So we have two groups, right? We have two groups of qualities here. Some are qualities that God will have. Those are sifat thubutiyah or sifat al-jamal. There are some that God will not have. There are some qualities God cannot have or will not have. And those are sifat al-jalal or sifat salbiyah, negated qualities that God doesn't have. Examples for each: God has knowledge, power, wisdom, life. He has free will. All of these are characteristics and qualities of God that He has, and at the highest level He has them. Okay, so these are sifat al-jalal. These are examples for sifat al-jalal or sifat thubutiyah. Same thing, sifat and qualities that actually hold for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually has and possesses. On the other hand, you have examples for sifat al-jalal or sifat salbiyah, negated. Those qualities that are negated from Allah, that are not attributed to Him. For example, having a place, being material, being composed of different parts. These are all attributes that Allah is devoid of. So these are referred to as characteristics that are negated from God, are taken away from God, are stripped away from God, are not attributed to Him. In other words, sifat salbiyah or sifat al-jalal. So that was Article 34. And salam alaikum to everyone who's joining and saying salam. Article 35, and you're going to have to excuse me, my voice is a little coarse. I kind of had a little cold, so alhamdulillah, I'm getting better. But my voice is a little weird these nights. Anyway, Article 35. Article 35 says, okay, that now that we know God has certain qualities, and we divided them and grouped them into different groups, so far into two groups, salbiyah and thubutiyah. How can we know more about these sifat that God has, these attributes that God has, namely sifat al-jamal and sifat thubutiyah, those things that God actually possesses? How can we know what they are, gain some knowledge about them, gain some cognition about them? Ayatullah Subhani here, he mentions two things. He says, one, the way of the intellect, and two, through revelation. Number one, aql, intellect. What we do is we sit down, we look around us, we see fine-tuning, And so what he says here, Ayatullah Subhani, has a lot to do with the argument from design that we have in theology, classical theology. Anyway, you look around you, the fine-tuning. Last week I shared the example of, I gave you the example of the egg, and how Imam Sadiq alayhi salam used the egg to prove God's existence to an atheist in his time, or someone who didn't believe in God in his time. So everything we look at that nature has to offer us, we find fine-tuning, we find design, we find just awesomeness in it. And when we see that, we can understand that if these things have awesomeness in them, excuse the term that I use, but it's a good way of describing it in my opinion. If we see the utmost awesomeness in the things out there, then it shows that the one who created them has such awesomeness and wisdom and power and knowledge, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's the first way he says you can gain cognition and knowledge of God's attributes, is just to look around you and see what has come from Him. When you see what has come from Him and the greatness that those things have, then you can also figure out the greatness and all the good qualities that He must have, because you find those in His creation as well. Wa alaikum assalam, sister, and welcome. Okay, that's one way. The other one, he said, was the way through revelation and seeing what the Quran says. And so Ayatullah Subhani, he brought a verse here that had like 10-15 of God's qualities in these two verses. Surah Hashr verses 22 to 23 or 23 to 24, I'm not 100% sure. هو الذي لا إله إلا هو الملك القدوس السلام المؤمن المهيمن العزيز الجبار المتكبر سبحان الله عما يشركون هو الله الخالق البارئ المصور له الأسماء الحسنى يسبح له ما في السماوات والأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم. Yes, so there's a lot that you can find in scripture. There's a lot you can find in the Quran and in Allah's words where He describes Himself. He talks about Himself. Usually, lots of times, at the end of a verse, at the end of every verse almost maybe, you'll find 1, 2, 3 of God's qualities that He's mentioned. Yes. So all of this is to introduce God to the people. So there's two ways, according to Ayatullah Subhani, to understand God a little better and to get a grasp of His qualities. One is through intellectual endeavor, looking around you and all of that. Number 2 is through revelation and seeing how God introduces Himself in His own words. And finally, in Article 35, Ayatullah Subhani, he said, so from all of this, we can conclude that what the Mu'attila say, Mu'attila, those who do ta'til of sifatullah, who say don't talk about God's attributes, it's not allowed because you can't understand Him. What they say is wrong. If trying to understand Him at least to an extent and scratching the surface and understanding Him, if that was not allowed and that was not possible, God Himself wouldn't speak of Himself in the Quran Himself. So all of these show that this idea of, let's not talk about God's qualities, this is something that is not acceptable. All right. Article number 36 last week that we covered. It was grouping God's characteristics from another angle. And that was through whether or not His essence is enough to be able to understand that quality, or if His essence is not enough to understand that quality and to deduce that quality from Him. Okay? So those qualities of God that we can deduce just by looking at His essence. And when I say looking, of course, for lack of better terms, not looking with our eyes. But when we take God's essence only into consideration, there are some qualities that we can deduce from it. So for example, when we think of God's essence, okay, His essence will have knowledge. His essence will have power itself, whether He has done anything or not yet. Okay? And I'm using these terms very loosely right now, whether He has done anything yet. Let's just say that that's a correct statement. God has power no matter what. God has knowledge no matter what. God has wisdom no matter what. These sifat, these qualities are referred to as sifat al-dhat, the qualities of His essence. If you want to describe His essence, He is all knowledge, He is all power, He is all of these things. But then there are some things that His essence isn't enough to be able to deduce those qualities. When you look at God and you just see wisdom, you see you see power and all of that. You don't get creatorship out of it. Him being Khaliq, being the creator, you don't get that out of it. Yes? Why? Because he has to actually create before you can call him a creator. Right? It's just like saying, hey, this guy, he's a doctor. But no, he's not a doctor actually. He hasn't gone through medical school. He has not actualized his potential to become a doctor, although he has the potential, but he hasn't actualized it. So true, he has the potential to be referred to as a doctor in the future, but you can't call him a doctor until he actually uses that potential to become a doctor. Same thing kind of with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah has the power to create, but if he hasn't created yet, we can't just look at his essence and be able to understand khaliqiyya, creatorship from his essence. We need him to actually have created so that we can call him creator. So there are some qualities of God that he can only be attributed with after he has done some things. These are referred to as sifat al-fi'l, or qualities of activity or action, they call it. And of course, as I said last week, these qualities go back to his qualities of essence. A person, if God wants to create, of course he has to have power, he has to have knowledge, wisdom, and all these things. So his creatorship depends on, yes, his qualities of essence. But at the end of the day, his creatorship itself is a quality of action, a quality of activity, as this book refers to. Alright, so having said all of that, we reach what we want to cover tonight, inshallah, which is Article 37 and onwards. Article 37 goes into Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's qualities of essence, talks about them a little bit more. Namely his knowledge, ilm, his qudra, power, and his hayat, life, the fact that he's living, and his free will and choice, okay, or irada and ikhtiyar, they call it. Talks about these four, Ayatullah Subhani, in this article number 37. So, it's not too hard, brothers and sisters. He doesn't get into detail too much. Philosophy and irfan and stuff like that might go very deep into these things, but in this book, as I've said again and again, what he's after is conciseness. So he's not going to get into too much detail. So let's read what he says here about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge. He says, the knowledge of God, since it partakes of his very essence, is eternal and infinite. Okay, so he says, look, when we look at ilm and knowledge, it is one of the sifat and qualities of his essence. In other words, when you look at God's essence only, you see all knowledge. Right? It's not like, oh, this part of him is knowledge, that part of him is something else. No, his essence equals knowledge. That's what he is. God is knowledge. God is power. God is love. All of these things, okay? He says, since these are quality, ilm and knowledge is a quality of essence, then because his essence is eternal and abadi and azali. Azali means infinite and eternal from on this side of the timeline. So you have the past and you have the future, right? When you have the past, that's one side of the timeline, and future is the other side of the timeline. On both ends of the timeline, he's going to be eternal. His knowledge is going to be eternal. Why? Because his knowledge is a sifat is one of the sifat of that, one of the qualities of his essence. And since the qualities of his essence are not different than his essence itself, and since his essence is eternal, his knowledge is also eternal. Very simple, really. Alright? Explain a little bit more. He says, in addition to possessing absolute knowledge of his own essence, God is aware of all that is other than him, whether universal or particular realities, before or after their creation. The Quran lays much stress upon this truth. For example, he gives a verse, Inna Allah bi kulli shay'in alim. Allah is aware and has knowledge of all things. Or Ala ya'lamu man khalaqa wa huwa al-latiful khabir. He has knowledge of all of that which he has created. Yes, and he is the subtle, the aware. In the sayings of the Imams and the Ahlul Bayt, there is also great emphasis on the eternity and totality of God's knowledge. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, for example, he says, لم يزل عالما excuse me بالمكان قبل تكوينه كعلمه به بعدما كونه وكذلك علمه بجميع الأشياء. That's nice. It's a nice philosophical hadith. It says that his knowledge of a makan, of a place, before its creation is like the knowledge of it after its creation. And his knowledge is thus as regards all things. So, if there's a thing out there, he has knowledge of it before it's created, after it's created, and that's just how his knowledge is with everything of his creation. Okay, so his knowledge is all-encompassing and infinite and eternal, just like his essence itself. Once again, I keep stressing, brothers and sisters, and this is a mistake people have made in the past, and there has been much, maybe unnecessary theological debates on this, that look, when we say God's knowledge is going to be eternal just like his essence, in our mind God's essence is one thing and his knowledge is something else. But we have to understand, outside in the real world, Allah's essence is not one thing and then his knowledge another thing. Allah is knowledge itself. His essence is knowledge and is power and is all these things at the same time. Just like how, for example, me, right? For me, not talking about my body, my soul, whatever it is, whatever, my mind, it's all sarf, it's all nahu, it's all these knowledges that I've studied here and there. A dentist, a doctor, same thing, right? We are that which we have in us of these different knowledges, right? My knowledge isn't one thing, and then a second thing separate from me is myself. No, I am these things. My soul is these things. It's not like you can cut me up into different pieces and say, this is my knowledge, this is my power, and so on. Yes, and I've explained this again and again. Some people in the past made that mistake. They said, okay, God's essence is eternal, so that's one eternal being, and his knowledge is also eternal, so that's another eternal being. No, we don't have two things here. We have one thing outside. In our minds, we separate these concepts from each other. This is very important to keep in mind. Okay, moving on to his power. He says just like his knowledge, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power is his essence itself. So his power is also going to be eternal and infinite, just like his essence is. And then he brings a couple of verses. وَكَانَ اللَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرًا. Allah is powerful over all things, can do anything. وَكَانَ اللَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ مُقْتَدِرًا. Kind of the same meaning. Another verse. Okay. Give us a hadith. He gives us a hadith. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam says, الْأَشْيَاءُ لَهُ سَوَاء عِلْمًا وَقُدْرَةً وَسُلْطَانًا وَمُلْكًا وَإِحَاطَةً. I like this hadith. It says that all things for him are equal. You see, for me, brothers and sisters, knowledge of what's in my office versus knowledge of what's in the sea versus knowledge of what's in the universe. Yeah, for me it's going to be different. One is easier, one is less, one is more. This hadith is saying everything for him is equal. Everything that he's created, because he's created it from nothing, his knowledge of it will be the same. Ilman. His power over it will be the same. You can have a scrawny, small, toddler, and then you can have a 35-year-old, fully developed and mature adult that's a huge bodybuilder. Yeah? For me, these two will be different. One is going to be tougher to fight, one is going to be easier to fight. But for Allah, it's the same, because He created both. His power, Him overpowering them is going to be the same. It doesn't make a difference. So ilman, His knowledge of everything will be the same. His power over all things will be the same. And sultan, His command over all things will be the same, if that's a good equivalent for this word sultan. Mulk means possession over all things. Ihatatan, the way He has encompassed everything. It's going to be equal. It doesn't matter if it's the universe or if it's an ant. When philosophically and theologically speaking, if you have been created by Allah and from nothingness, it doesn't matter how big or small you are physically, you are the same for Him. So this is Allah's power. Okay, of course this hadith talked more about power, but it had power in it as well. Okay, now someone here will ask the famous question, oh, you're saying he is powerful over all things. He can do anything he wants. Then can he make a stone that he cannot lift? Or let me read a hadith to you actually. Someone asked Amir al-Mu'minin alayhi salam, Imam Ali. It says, قِيلَ لأمير المؤمنين هل يقدر ربك أن يدخل الدنيا في بيضة? That someone asked, or Amir al-Mu'minin was asked, can your Lord fit the dunya, the earth, into an egg? من غير أن يصغر الدنيا أو يكبر البيضة, without expanding the egg or shrinking the earth. So right here, this person knows that God does have the power to expand them or shrink them, and in that way he would be able to fit one into the other. But that's not the way he's asking his question. He's saying without changing any of their dimensions, the earth and the egg, can God fit the earth in the egg? So this question, if somebody comes up with such a question, a stone that God cannot lift, fitting the earth into an egg, without expanding one or shrinking the other. You're saying God can do everything. Can he do something like this? And the answer is no, he can't. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot do that. But when we say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot do that, what is meant? Yeah? Wa alaikum assalam, Brother Sadiq. What is meant? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot do that. Cannot can have one of two meanings. Cannot can mean that God doesn't have the power for it, or cannot can mean that thing that wants to be created doesn't have the capacity to be created like that. That thing that you want to bring into existence, that thing that you want to take place, cannot take place in and of itself. And that's why Imam Ali answers very beautifully. He says, قال, when this person asks him about the egg and the earth, he says, إن الله تبارك وتعالى لا ينسب إلى العجز. That don't attribute ajz and not being able to. Don't attribute this to God and say God cannot. God can do everything. Everything means everything that can actually be existing. Not something that cannot come into existence. Not something that's impossible to come. It's like saying, can God create nothingness? God can create everything, but nothingness equals not being created. So it's impossible in and of itself. Allah doesn't have a problem. That thing has a problem. Yeah. So he says, لا ينسب إلى العجز والذي سألتني لا يكون. What you have asked me is something that just can't take place. So in other words, God can bring into existence everything or anything that can come into existence. For me, or for you, or for any one of us, we can't bring everything out there that can come into existence. We can't bring it into existence. We don't have the power for it. That's the difference between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That Allah has the power to bring into existence everything and anything that can be brought into existence. That's the difference. But that doesn't mean that God can bring into existence everything, even if it's impossible for it to come into existence. Impossible to come into existence means if it comes into existence, it's not what it was supposed to be. Yeah? Anyway, there's a lot of talk about this. I think this is a very easy subject, actually. It's like saying, it's like me coming up to somebody and with a 10 pound or a 10 gallon container and say, fill this up with 20 gallons of water, please, please, please. The guy says it'll spill out. It's not my fault. Your container can't take it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, you want me to create something like this? I'll create it, but once I create it, it shows that it wasn't what it was supposed to be, because that which you wanted to come into existence is something that cannot have existence. If it has existence, it's not going to be what you wanted it to be. Very simple. If I'm going to shrink the earth, it's not going to be the earth anymore. It's not going to be the earth that is this big anymore. It's going to be another earth that's this big. That doesn't count. You want me to shrink? You want me to fit it in the egg? You want me to fit it in the egg? You want it to be an earth that is, I don't know how big the earth is. I forgot. What is the circumference of the earth, or whatever the word for it is? Diameter of the earth. let's say it's 100,000, I don't know, miles, whatever. You want me to fit the earth that is 100,000 miles into an egg that is 5 centimeters big. That means 100,000 miles is 100,000 miles and not 100,000 miles at the same time. You see, it shows that that thing doesn't have the capacity. Anyway, the third attribute of the sifat al-dhat, of those qualities of God that have to do with His essence, it is al-hayat, and that's life. God has life. How do you know God has life? Ayatullah Subhani, tell me. He says the fact that He has power and He has knowledge. Okay, Brother Wajahid says 24,901. What is that? Kilometers, miles? So I guess that's the diameter or whatever the word is for the earth. 24,901. Okay, cool. Now we know something new tonight. Life, he says, Ayatullah Subhani says, life equals knowledge and power and all these things. Right? It equals all of these things. So if something has power, it has knowledge. In other words, it has life. You can't have knowledge and power but not have life and be dead, he says. In other words, I think what he's saying is, although he doesn't verbalize this or say it verbatim, but life is something that is self-evident. It's self-explanatory. When you say something is alive, you know what alive means versus dead. Okay, that's why he doesn't explain it too much. He says God is alive, but we have to understand these characteristics that we're discussing about God. These are different than what we have. We have life too. We have life, but at the same time we experience death. That's why in the end he brings this verse, the famous verse, وَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى الْحَيِّ الَّذِي لَا يَمُوتُ, Surah Furqan, verse 58. And rely on the live one. Which live one? There's a lot of live beings out there. Rely on the live one that never dies. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. On the day of judgment, or right before the day of judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the hadiths tell us, will tell the angel of death and Israfil and let's say the angel of death for now, tells him, okay, you take your life as well. So even the angel of death will lose his life. Everyone is supposed to die except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so He is the origin of all life and all forms of life. Okay. Number 4, quality number 4. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's irada and His will, free will or will. I'm going to read off of the book for this one. And before I read off of it, there was an ant on my book, I had to blow it off. Before I read, let me just explain. Will and God's will and this type of stuff, irada, ikhtiyar, these things, it can have one of two meanings. Depending on the meaning of it, it will fall under sifat al-dhat or sifat al-fi'l, he says. So let's go through this and see what he says. He says, and the translation, by the way, is it's complicated. It's a little complicated English. It's not very smooth and basic English. So you bear with me. An agent who is conscious of his activities. Okay, so let's just say a person. A person who does things consciously is more complete than one who is not. Okay, so right here we have something to talk about. When you do something, brothers and sisters, when we do things, you tell me, let's say you did something willingly, voluntarily, paying attention. For example, you painted a picture. Yeah, you spent hours and hours and hours, you painted a picture. Now people are coming and there's oohs and ahs filling the room when they're looking at your painting. Wow, so good, subhanallah, mashallah. Things like that. May Allah give you tawfiq, that kind of stuff. You know what I'm saying? So here, no one's going to say, oh, hey, why are you praising this person so much? That person deserves praise. They did all this hard work, and now what they have is a piece of art that they can be proud of. That's one. Take that and then compare it to this now. If somebody is walking on the street and there's a few buckets of paint out there and he accidentally trips over something, knocks over these buckets of paint, and these buckets of paint just so happen, when they splash the paint on the canvas that's there, a nice painting comes into existence, right? Can this person now stand there and say, hey people, come look at my painting, and commend me and praise me on it and so on? No, it was on accident. It wasn't out of your free will. It wasn't done voluntarily and out of willingly. It wasn't your choice. You didn't do it. Well, that's why we can't attribute it to you. Since we can't attribute it to you, you don't deserve praise, my friend. Sorry. Right? So I think it's very clear. This versus that, the one who actually did something willingly, with their will, they are more complete. So that's what he's trying to say here, Ayatullah Subhani. He says one line, I have to explain it for like 5 minutes. You see, that's why some of these books sometimes need to be taught, and just reading them won't be enough sometimes, some parts of them at least. I'm not discouraging reading. I encourage reading 100%. But sometimes questions might come up, so that's when you have to, inshallah, ask. Okay, so an agent or a person who is conscious of his activities is more complete than one who is not. A free agent, we're not talking about NBA free agency here. A free agent, a person who does something freely and willingly, endowed with a will to perform his acts such that he can choose to accomplish or not accomplish a given act, is more complete than a person constrained and compelled by someone else to do or not to do something. So I explained what is meant by all of this. Being helpless and unable to choose for himself. Okay, so this person, if he does something, this person is less complete than the other one. Taking into account this point and seeing that God is the most perfect agent in existence, it is altogether natural to assert that the divine essence is, by nature, an absolutely free agent. What is he saying? He's saying, look, so we talked about his knowledge. We talked about his power. We talked about his life and him never dying and all of these things. So he is the most perfect being out there. If he's the most perfect and most complete being out there, would it make sense that he does things out of compulsion and not out of free will? No, it doesn't make sense, because he's the most complete being out there. You can't be the most complete being out there but not do things out of your own will. See, I like how he's using this argument here. It's a nice argument he has. Ayatullah Subhani has. So I'll read that again. Taking into account this point, and seeing that God is the most perfect agent in existence, because he has life, because he has qudra, he has knowledge, power, all these things, it is altogether natural to assert and to conclude that the divine essence of God is by nature an absolutely free agent that has irada, has ikhtiyar, has will, free will, and at the utmost levels of free will, as a matter of fact. Neither constrained from without, nor imposed upon by anything other than himself. And if it is said that God is the one who wills the murid, if we say that God is one who wills, the meaning is that he has perfect liberty to will whatever he desires. So that is what is meant by him having free will. He can do anything that he wants. He is boss. Now, of course, once again, he is boss that has knowledge, wisdom, power, and all these things. So he's not going to do things in vain, or he's not going to be making mistakes, and so on and so forth. He goes on now, Ayatullah Subhani. He says, will, in the conventional sense of a human faculty that is originated in time and is actualized gradually thereafter, does not figure in the divine essence. You know what? Let me stop reading and explain now. He says, says we have to keep one thing in mind. I'm not going to read the rest. It's a little complicated, a little confusing actually, the text I think right now. Let me explain in more simple terms now. He says, when we look at our will, brothers and sisters, when I want to do something, when I decide to do something and I do it, it takes time. It's something gradual. Okay? For example, I don't know, I want to go to a certain restaurant. Okay, what'll I do? Well, in this part of the world, the first thing I do is probably go on zabiha.com or something, see if it's halal or not. Then slowly, as I find out that it is halal, I'm starting to make the decision now. You see, my will is working now, my free will. Okay, so now I was at 0% of a decision to go. Now I'm at 50%. But I'm not 100% yet. You know what I look at next? I go and read reviews of the restaurant. Just because it's halal doesn't mean I'm going to go. Yes, that was like 15 years ago maybe. 20 years ago maybe, when there weren't too many halal joints out there. But now you have options. Especially if you live in Houston, man. There's a lot of halal joints there. Anyway. Or in Dearborn, of course. And across America. Anyway, that's beyond our discussion right now. As you can see, I can get distracted very easily. All right, so I'm at 50% of a decision to do what? To go to this restaurant. Only 50%. Why am I not at 100%? Because I got to read the reviews, because I got options, man. I'm going to look around and see which one has the better reviews. That's what I'm going to go for. So I read reviews of this restaurant. They're good reviews. 4.5 stars out of 5 stars by 200 people who gave their opinion. Okay, so now I'm at 75%, decision, but still not 100%. Why? Because okay, this restaurant is halal. 1, good. 2, excellent reviews. 3, it's steak. Steak is awesome. The steak is awesome, and man, I never had steak. I want to try it out. But wait a minute, I've heard that steak can sometimes be very steep in price. So I'm at 75%, but I'm gonna still wait. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look into the pricing as well. The prices, and see if it's worth it or not for me. And then I look at the price. The prices are like very reasonable. Okay, so now from 75% of a decision, I come to 100%. And so now I have made my decision. My will and my willpower and my free will has been exercised, and I've come to a conclusion. I'm going to do something now. Yeah. Now, sister says we have in New York. We also have a lot of halal joints. That's true. That's true. We have halal joints there as well. Brother Bilal just joined. I know he's in Dearborn, and they're all about halal food there too. Yeah, in Dallas we have options too. Alhamdulillah. All right. I'm at 100% now, but it took me time. It was something gradual for me to make a decision and exercise my free will. Look at that. The moment I start talking about restaurants, our viewers go up, mashallah. So it took me time. That's what he's saying here. Ayatullah Subhani, when he says it's gradual. It's gradual. He says, let me read the English for you again. He says, will, in the conventional sense of a human faculty that is originated in time and is actualized gradually thereafter. So I have a willpower. It takes time for it to gradually be actualized. Does not figure in the divine essence. In other words, this kind of will cannot be attributed to God and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You can't say that Allah has willpower the way we do. For us to actualize, to exercise our will, it takes time, and it's a gradual process. For Him, though, it's different. How is it for Him? Let me just read off of this again. For Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, hence, he says, we have the sayings from the Ahlul Bayt intended to prevent error and deviation, intended to prevent us from making this mistake of thinking that God, for Him also, His will takes time and gradualness for it to be exercised and actualized. He said, to prevent this error and deviation, we have hadiths. What did the hadiths say to us? To the effect that the will of God is identical to the accomplishment and realization of the act. Let me explain that now. For us, brothers and sisters, to will something takes time. After we will it, we have to actually do it now. Gradualness. Even a second is gradualness. Even a second is slow. For Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we don't have this. As a matter of fact, there's no time when it comes to Allah. So when Allah wills something, it's not like He wills it and then it happens. His willing it equals it happening it. This is very important. إِذَا أَرَادَ شَيْئًا أَن يَقُولَ لَهُ كُن فَيَكُونَ is metaphorical, brothers and sisters. It's metaphorical. When the Quran says, when Allah wills something, all He needs to do is to say to it, be, and it comes into existence, and it is. Yeah? This is metaphorical. Not that God has to actually verbalize, because that even takes time. That's why the tafasir and these commentaries of the Quran, when you look at them, when they explain this verse, they're saying, when He says, I say kun, I say be, and it is, means I will it, and when I will it, it is. My willing it is equal to its existence out of non-existence, okay? This is super, super important. Okay, so, brothers and sisters, this is important now. If we're going to categorize, now that we've gone through irada and will, we have two main points that we covered. One, that will and willpower, all these things, a person who does things with willpower is more complete than a person who does it out of compulsion and doesn't have free will. That was one point. Another point is that irada can have one of two meanings. Sometimes you will something, you think about it and all those things. It has to do with your knowledge. Sometimes you will it means you create it. That's with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, he wants to conclude here, Ayatullah Subhani. He says, from all these points that we said, if we say that irada is one of the qualities of God, if irada, which means will, means that God has free will, He can do whatever He likes, this will become one of the qualities of His essence, not qualities of action. Even before anything comes into existence, He has the power to do anything He likes. So it's a divine quality of His essence. But if we take His will to mean His creation of things, because why? Because the hadiths are telling us that. Hadiths tell us when He wills something, that means it comes into existence. If His willing and His will equals creation of things, then it's very clear that this willing, this willpower, and irada and ikhtiyar will be one of His sifat al-fi'l, one of His action, one of His qualities of action. Yeah. So it depends on how you define this term. I personally think, if you ask me, of course, will and irada and ikhtiyar is going to be one of the divine qualities of His essence. It is true that when He wills something, it comes into existence. But at the end of the day, conceptually speaking, God's will is one thing. God's creating of things is another thing. Right? So true that when He wills, willing equals creation. That's in the outside world though. That's in the outside world, that they're one thing. You can't separate them. Willing something equals it being created. But conceptually, His will, this quality of His ikhtiyar and irada, is a part of His essence. If He actualizes it, if He exercises it through creation, then His creation will be a sifatul fi'l. And that sifatul fi'l is something that goes back to His sifat al-dhat and His essences, His qualities of essence. As I said before, the qualities of fi'l and action always will go back to the qualities of dhat and qualities of essence. This is a perfect example for that, apparently, in my opinion. The fact that His creation is something that is an attribute of His action, is a quality sifatul fi'l, one of the sifatul fi'l, But to have it, it has to go back to one of his sifat al-dhat, which is his ikhtiyar, his irada. Alright, so with that, and we didn't have any questions tonight, mashallah. That just shows what a good job I'm doing, and so clearly explaining that we don't have questions. Alhamdulillah. Yeah, no, I'm just kidding. Alright, it can also mean that everyone's just like totally confused, you know? But no, inshallah, that's not the case. So we went through Article 37 tonight, and it was just Article 37 actually, but it had 4 parts to it. 4 of the main qualities of essence of God. Next week, we will move into the qualities of action, or activity as the book uses the equivalent for, which are takallum, God's speech, sidq, truth in telling the truth, and hikmah, wisdom. So we have to see what the difference between hikmah and wisdom and knowledge is also. So these are things that we have to go through next week, inshallah. We'll cover next week, inshallah ta'ala. And after that, I don't know if we won't get through all of it. Well, inshallah, it looks like next week we'll go through all of the sifatul fi'l as well. There's some cool stuff there as well that we need to cover, inshallah. Yeah, actually looking at it now, it's some cool stuff, inshallah. So, inshallah, till next week, brothers and sisters, keep us in your du'as and make sure to tune in. And also the new flyer, the flyer for March has been published, and you can see the dates there. I'll be available, and I'll be having sessions for every Wednesday in March, inshallah. I know Sheikh Mahdi, I think one of the weeks, if I'm not mistaken, the second week of March, he's not going to be able to have his session. So just take a look at the flyer, and inshallah share these videos with whoever you think will benefit from them as well, inshallah. Thank you very much for tuning in. Until next week, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.